The year is 1861, and it has been 40 years since Mexico gained its independence from Spain. These 40 years have been tumultuous, to say the least, but nothing would come close to threaten their independence than the imperial ambitions of a new Napoleon. This is the story of how a young and unstable republic fought off an empire. This is the story of the Second French Intervention in Mexico. In the 1840s, to the detriment of Mexico and Native Americans, the US had a destiny to manifest. This led to the Mexican-American War, which was a major defeat for Mexico and resulted in the loss of California during the Mexican Cession of 1848. Ironically, less than a year later, gold would be discovered there, thus starting the Californian gold rush. As a result, Dictator Santa Anna was exiled from the country, and tensions rose further and further between the liberals, led by Benito Juárez, and the conservatives, leading to yet another civil war a decade later. On the 17th of July, 1861, after the capture of Mexico City by the liberals, Juárez suspended any loan repayment to European powers for 2 years. He had good reasons to, as the Mexican economy was devastated and his coffers emptied. But these loans amounted to 70 million pesos for Britain, 9 million for Spain, and 3 million for France. Understandably, the Europeans weren't thrilled to hear that. On October 31st, 1861, France, Britain, and Spain signed the Convention of London, which established a joint effort to extract repayment from Mexico, and explicitly stated that no nation would seek out territorial gains, nor interfere in Mexican politics. This was an affair of money. Or it should have been. You see, while the 19th century was trouble for Mexico, France was no better off with yet another revolution in 1848, which led to the overthrowing of the king and the election of Napoleon. No, this Napoleon. Napoleon III, the nephew of the first. And much like his uncle, Napoleon III had delusions of grandeur. But unlike his uncle, he didn't really have the genius to back those views. 3 years after his election, he suspended the elected assembly to establish the Second Empire. And when most European monarchs felt that the Americas was now has-been, and the new hot thing was Africa, Napoleon III eyed the unstable but mineral-rich country of Mexico. Through the installation of a puppet government, he hoped to open the country to European trade and secure French access to Mexican silver, as well as curb US expansionism. The Convention of London, as well as the start of the American Civil War, which meant that the US would be unable to impose its Monroe Doctrine, felt like the perfect time to do just that. In December, the fleets of the Tripartite Islands arrived at the port of Veracruz. The Spanish forces, under orders of General Juan Prim, had captured the fortress of San Juan de Julia. After that, Veracruz quickly fell, and then Cordoba and Orizaba. In February 1862, General Prim signed the Convention of La Soledad, which stated that the alliance recognized the Republican government of Mexico and would not interfere with it. During that time, however, France kept sending more and more expeditionary forces to Mexico, to the point that it became quite suspicious. This resulted in the collapse of the Tripartite Islands and the withdrawal of Spanish and British forces in late April. Meanwhile, 6,500 men, under the orders of de Lorence, marched towards Mexico City, while the Mexicans, under the orders of General Ignacio Zaragoza, struggled to assemble an appropriate defense. And so, it was with a smaller, inexperienced, and ill-equipped army that Zaragoza marched his troops against an army that hadn't been defeated since Waterloo, nearly half a century ago. The first encounter between the French and Mexican troops occurred on April 28th and was a resounding defeat for the Mexican army. As a result, Zaragoza was forced to retreat with his 4,000 men to the heavily fortified city of Puebla. On the night of May 3rd, Zaragoza arrived at Puebla, leaving him barely any time to fortify the city, as the French troops arrived just 2 days later at 9 a.m. At 11:45, the French artillery started shelling the Guadeloupe fort, with little effect as the old stone held firm. Against all advice, de Lorence ordered his men to assault the fort. They went once and were pushed back. They went a second time and were pushed back again. Finally, de Lorence sent his full reserve for the third assault. However, by that time the artillery had used all its ammunition, and so the assault was carried out unsupported. Predictably, the result was no different than the 2 other attempts, and as a final blow, the retreating French troops were charged by Zaragoza's cavalry. Soon after, a torrential rain started, which made the ground too muddy for any hope of another attack. Demoralized, the French camped another few days before they finally withdrew to Orizaba. That night, the bells of Puebla rang, and the Mexican troops celebrated by singing La Marseillaise, which had been banned by Napoleon III. In a telegram to President Juárez, Zaragoza praised his troops and hoped that this victory would bring the conflict to an end. He finished by saying, "I wish that our dear homeland, now so despondent, is one day happy and respected by all nations." And while the battle was a resounding victory for Mexico, it wouldn't be enough. The country was already on its knees before France declared war, and there was only so much one could do against a superpower. But that's a story for another day. Eventually, the Republicans would regain control of Mexico, but Zaragoza wouldn't live to see that day, as he died of typhus only 1 month after his heroic victory at Puebla. In his memory, the town of Puebla was renamed Puebla de Zaragoza, and when Juárez regained control of the country, he decided to commemorate the Battle of Puebla by declaring the 5th of May a national holiday, hence where Cinco de Mayo comes from. So no, unlike what an upsetting amount of Americans believe, Cinco de Mayo does not celebrate Mexican independence. Mexico's independence is celebrated on the 16th of September, the day El Grito de Dolores started their independence war. Furthermore, Cinco de Mayo isn't really that much of a big deal in Mexico, and is celebrated at best with military parades and battle reenactments, and not with endless sangrias at Chili's. But then one shouldn't expect much from a country who think this is Mexican food. Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, sharing, commenting, and if you haven't yet, subscribing. This was Barris. I will see you next week, but until then, merde!